In C++, the term temporary object refers to an object that is created to be used for a very short time, which means it has a very short lifetime. It is typically created within an expression, or its lifetime remains the lifetime of the expression itself, which means when evaluation of an expression in which such an object has been used begins, that means the evaluation of the expression begins, the object is created and comes into existence, and by the time when evaluation of the expression ends, the object goes out of scope. Let me begin with the following code. First, let me quickly explain this code, then I will start talking about the topic, temporary object. We have a class called student with the data member's name and ID. We have a default constructor. We have a custom constructor which does validation of the data, and if not valid, it sets to the default state. If valid, it copies data into the data members. We have a display function which actually does display the data if the data is valid, and we have main function without anything in it. Now let me create an object here of student type. Let me call st1. In this case, I create st1 object. It is created using default constructor, but let me use this custom constructor to create the object. So I am supplying two arguments, one j01 as id, and let me give the name Jackson. Now this is an object which is created, which has a memory, it occupies memory space, and it can be identified by this name st1, and this object is accessible beginning from this point up to this point. If I create this object in a inner scope, in a block scope like this, then it will be accessible from the point where it is created to this closing curly brace to this point. Now sometimes I may want to create an object, but I don't want to use it more than one time. For example, I want to just create an object, use it one time, and then just I will not need that object anymore. In that case, we can go for a temporary object. You can create a temporary object using this syntax. You just have a student name. You can just imagine that you are actually calling this function, right? So a student and id. So this is a temporary object, and if I create this object like this, then what is the use of it, right? So purpose is this is the entire thing is one expression. So we want to create within this expression, and we want we want to complete using it within that expression. So the object that is created for that purpose within the expression is a temporary object. How I can use it? I can do something like this. In this case, we have a display function of this object. So through this object, we are able to access display function. Now in this case, this is an expression which will be evaluated, and during the evaluation of this expression, this object is created, and that object is used to invoke the display function, and after that that object is not accessible anymore. So this sort of object is called temporary object. And another feature of temporary object is it doesn't have name. It is nameless. Sometimes it may also be possible to make this object available. I mean, obviously this object doesn't have a name, but it is possible to make this object available afterwards. We can do that by binding it to some reference. For example, I have a temporary object created using this syntax. So if I do bind it to a reference like this, student reference equals to reference. So we create a reference variable and actually set it to temporary object. In that case, we are able to use it afterwards. Not only for display, it can be used for different purposes depending on what functionality are available with for this object. Sometimes compiler can itself create a temporary object. One situation is, for example, uh, compiler can for example, if I have, let's say, a function called create object, and I pass the data into it, let's say name and ID, and I want this function to return an object and copy it into let me call this st or something like this, because I have not used this. Okay, so if I have a function which actually does that thing, for example, it returns student object and receives the name and the ID, maybe we can do something like this. So student st ID name. So if this is a function that is designed to create a object and return, then in this case it will actually, this return object will be stored as in a temporary object, because when the control moves out of this function scope, this object will is actually destroyed. So that object, to keep that object, it is stored in a temporary object, and it is actually um, then after that it was copied to this object st. So that is one situation where the compiler can create a temporary object. And in another case, if I have something like this, for example, if I have a plus operator overloaded like this, I want to add I want to have uh, the operator, I mean addition operator overloaded, which will actually get two student objects st1 and it will return, let's say, student object, but the return object will have the name uh, concatenated. The return object will have a name which is a concatenation of the name of st1 object and st2 object. So let me create a name equals to new dynamic memory to store st1 dot, I think I need to have a get name, because this is a public space, so I don't have direct access to the name. So I want to create a getter function for name, and I want to use this function here, st dot get name, and length of that name plus get name, and plus one character for uh, null character, one space for the null character, and one additional space if you want to put some character when you attach two names, for example first name, some asterisks, or second name, something like that. So one additional character depending on how you want to concatenate. Now copy the st, I think it should be st1, I think there was something missing here, st1 and st2. So st1 dot, you copy the first name into it, and then after that if you want to, let's say, concatenate by placing one character in between the name, maybe plus and strcat st2 dot get. So this will be the name, and I could create an object st id, I mean, let me pass one id, and in the case of name I could pass this name. So this is an object, and return. So in this case we should be able to add two objects. So to use that code, student stmp equals to, let's say, we can concatenate all these names, st1 plus stsr plus st, and finally we can maybe display. So in this case what happens is compiler will actually call this function by passing this two operands to it, and the result is stored in a temporary object, and that temporary object is actually passed to the same function, and as a first to the first parameter, and then the result, obtained result, again the return result is in a temporary object that is copied to stemp. That is how it works. This is the situation where the compiler creates a temporary object. Let me go to the terminal. I want to make sure that this code actually doesn't have problem, because I have not tried it. So here it cannot bind. Okay, I think there was a small problem here. The problem is that if you want to bind this, because this is a kind of R value, this is not a L value object, therefore you have to make it, because if you bind as a L value, then you should be allowed to make changes. So this binding must be through constant reference if you are actually binding to I mean a reference to a temporary object. So let me go back to the terminal, try to here. Maybe there was a typo problem in the function const. Try again. Yeah, it's working now. Execute. Now you can see in the first case it was the outcome of the temporary object directly, I mean invocation of display function through the temporary object. This was the invocation of outcome of the invocation of display function through the reference, the temporary object binded to a reference, and this was the outcome of the final temporary object after the addition operator. So the name is actually three names are concatenated. This is just an example, but the main purpose of here is to demonstrate that you can have a temporary object in your code, or sometimes compiler can also create a temporary object for some purpose. And finally, what I want to actually bring your attention to is here here also you can make use of temporary object. For example, this is a default constructor. Here in the else, if the received data is not valid, we set to the default state. And you can, if you see, the logic is same here. So you can make use of this default constructor by doing something like this: current object equals to uh, student. In this case also, this student is a temporary object, but object created by invoking default constructor. You can set that temporary object to the current object. Then after that, if you do set to the default state, and then after that, if the data is valid, then you copy, otherwise you just ignore. That is actually what happens in the previous code as well, right? So if you do like this, then you may not need this code else block. But when you do like this, you have to be careful. If you have a resource variable, for example, if name is stored in the pointer, then there could be uh, in this case it is there will not be problem in this particular case, because you are creating an object. But if you are doing in other functions, other logic, where this name would be already pointing to some dynamic memory, that could be the issue. So you have to be careful about, so that if you want to use this kind of assignment, then you have to make sure that you actually clean the memory properly and then do the assignment. So this is all I have to discuss on this topic. Thank you for watching this video.